Previously, we have seen a frame-by-frame breakdown of the stock footage of Batman arriving at police headquarters, yet another food analogy in a superhero rewind introduction, a list of Batman moments that influenced later incarnations, long-winded descriptions of 5 of Captain Logan's favorite Batman episodes, something about Andy Griffith, Andy Kaufman, Andy Warhol, research, puns, fatigue, an incredibly long hiatus. Can Captain Logan finally get through another 45 minutes of Batman overview and reveal his favorite 5 episodes? Hold on to your swivel chair, the geekiest is yet to come. Number 5, the Zodiac crimes, the Joker's hard times, and the Penguin declines. Yep, you heard that right, a 3-parter. Joker plans out a 12-part scheme to steal things that go along with the signs of the Zodiac. He seems to have a new obsession every time he returns, and this time it's astrology. He's not really trying to make anyone think he can predict the future based on planet alignment. It's more just a gimmick to give him an excuse to try to steal lots of different things, make puns about a variety of subjects, and subvert the audience's expectations by adding a second death trap at the end of part 2 and stretch this out to a 3rd episode. There's your standard no honor among thieves message with the hench girl who's too trusting and keeps getting herself into trouble with the bad guys even after pledging herself to Batman's cause, but mostly it's about being about as outlandish as this show ever gets, and that's what I love about it. It's padded as far as story goes, but I like that we get the premise that makes that happen up front. We've got to get through 12 separate crimes. It's the G-rated Long Halloween, but it certainly wastes no time with the humor. There are as many puns and ridiculous situations and set pieces packed into this one as humanly possible. The story has everything. It's definitely the biggest episode in scope. It pulls out all the stops and says, yeah, let's just go nuts. It's dense, like Chief O'Hara. In the same story, we get a fight with Joker and Penguin at an opera concert, Joker impersonating a police officer, a vinyl record fight, the oddest fight situation in the series besides the underwater fight in Batman's Anniversary, a Dragnet parody scene, Joker and his henchmen throwing fish, a death trap involving a deadly model solar system, and Robin almost swallowed by a giant clam. I mean, seriously, where in the world did Joker get a giant clam? All the water in the city turning into strawberry jelly, an exploding Batarang, an exciting denouement in the Batcave, and rare appearances of both the Batcopter and the Batmobile parachute pickup service. And while we're on the subject, does Batman hire a couple guys to just sit in a van all day and wait around in case he needs them to grab his parachutes after he makes an emergency U-turn? The few times we see the parachute pickup van, it's always the same stock footage. You never see Batman make a phone call or anything. Are we just skipping that part, or do these guys really have a device that somehow instantly tells them when the parachutes have been deployed and exactly where the Batmobile is? And say what you want about the show being too campy, but the Superman from Man of Steel could sure learn a thing or two from Adam West Batman. Forget collateral damage, this guy won't so much as litter. This is a crazy, unpredictable romp, and that 3rd part took me completely by surprise. When you're watching a show that follows a pretty tight formula every episode, it's almost mind-blowing when it suddenly breaks its own rules. I had been binging this show for a couple of weeks. Out of nowhere, the Joker's scheme to steal rare fish turns out to just be a ruse to lure Batman and Robin into yet another death trap. Lure. I still can't help but sound like this show when I talk about it. I am never ever reviewing Dr. Seuss books. I thought for sure they'd turn it around on the Joker, like somehow Batman knew what he was planning and would turn Joker's trap into a trap for the Joker. And that happens quite a bit in the show, and in fact, the end of the 3rd part is exactly that scenario. Batman knows Joker and Penguin are in his trunk and trying to get to the Batcave, so he takes them there and then has the home field advantage. But at the end of the Joker's Hard Times, a title which in itself is a misdirection, not only is there a bigger, more gruesome death trap, but Robin is completely inside the clam at the cliffhanger, save a single foot hanging out the front. Now, obviously, I wasn't afraid for Robin's life, but I was as sucked in and emotionally invested as I ever found myself viewing all these episodes in rapid succession as an adult. I found myself transported back in time a little to when I was a kid and I took these dire, hopeless situations completely seriously. It's hard to rekindle that feeling again with an adult perspective, but I relished that surprise because it got me so close. That's primarily why I put it so high on my list. The show did a couple more three-parters after this, but none are as widely creative, and it's the kind of shocker that only works once. It's a great alternate format, though, because it's a more authentic simulation of that movie serial structure, where there's a much longer, elaborate story, and then at the end of every episode, the heroes are in some sort of peril. In a lot of them, including the Batman serials in the 40s, the way the heroes escape next episode is cheap or totally nonsensical. It's fun to see an escalation of the absurdity of death traps in the same story. I measure the escape explanations in this show by level of ridiculous. The more hilariously impossible and far-fetched they are, the better. One of my favorites is in The Penguin Goes Straight and Not Dead He Ain't, where the Penguin sets up Gordon and O'Hara to execute Batman and Robin hidden behind a wall in a carnival shooting gallery. Batman and Robin have bulletproof soles in the bottoms of their shoes. Of course they do. And it's made all the more fantastically preposterous when Chief O'Hara, continuing the shtick of the police being totally oblivious, says, "Quite a recoil for a pop gun." The escapes in this episode are pretty fun too, though not nearly that good. The first is about what you'd expect. Batman manages to free an arm and times a batarang throw just in time to take out Saturn, which has the longest fuse ever. Anybody who buys fireworks from the company that made that is going to have a really boring 4th of July. With the clam, Batman breaks through his bonds with sheer muscle power and then pries the clam open with his bare hands. Might have seemed a little more lame if he hadn't then said, "Every man has his own inner strength that comes at a time of crisis." Oddly, villain team-ups aren't something we get a ton of in this show, despite what you might expect if you've seen the movie. Sometimes they're used to introduce a new villain, like in The Sandman Cometh and The Catwoman Goeth, but weirdly, there aren't a lot of team-ups with the most popular villains. Maybe that was due to scheduling conflicts. We have this story with the Joker and Penguin, and one in the 3rd season that nearly made my list, called The Funny Feline Felonies and the Jokes on Catwoman. Romero and Eartha Kitt had a fantastic on-screen dynamic, and the characters weirdly got along really well. It was one of the more cordial of the bad guy alliances. And in the penultimate episode, The Entrancing Dr. Cassandra, there's a great chance at one last reunion with all the major recurring villain actors when Cassandra springs 6 of the major ones from prison. But sadly, they're all played by doubles, never have any lines of dialogue, and again, I suspect it just wasn't possible to get all the actors in a room together. I think the Penguin is mostly just red herring in this one. It's the Joker's plan, and he's just there hoping to profit from it. He gets captured 20 minutes into the first part and doesn't show up in the second. I like the way that's structured. I really didn't expect to see him again, and I was a little surprised to see Burgess Meredith's name pop up in the credits for the 3rd part. Batman doesn't see him coming in the first part, but he really should when Venus says, "I'm felonious, but I'm not a fink." There's only one man on Earth who says that. World's greatest detective, my face. Ah well, as usual, nobody's especially smart here, and Batman wins because he has the right set of morals. The ditzy hench girl believes just about anything anybody tells her. Batman, Penguin, anybody. Penguin seems to have forgotten at the end that he's actually been to the Batcave before, and the police buy into the Joker's disguise when he just puts on a police hat and gets in a cop car. I mean, we're talking Lego Star Wars logic here. The story is nicely bookended with 2 similar fights. One on a stage in front of a hilariously oblivious opera singer who doesn't seem to even realize what's going on until he gets kidnapped, and the one at the end in the Batcave. In the first, Batman gets Penguin, a distraction Joker uses to his advantage, and then in the second, Batman finally gets the upper hand over both and apprehends them in an even more dramatic and exciting setting. And in both fights, there's a stunt where the Penguin opens his umbrella to slow his fall from a great height, which is corny and awesome. I'm not real sure why Joker springs the Penguin from prison except to bookend the story. Penguin's main role in the final act is to seduce the turncoat hench girl Venus into getting him into the Batcave, who Batman Batman seems to be keeping around because Venus is becoming both his fire and his desire, but Joker couldn't have sprung him for that purpose because when he executes Operation Laundry Bag, yeah, Operation Laundry Bag, he thinks Batman's been eaten by the giant clam. As I said, this villain plot kind of falls apart if you poke at it too much, but hey, it's the Joker. To paraphrase the same character from The Dark Knight, he just does things. He seems to be a lot more interested in causing as much chaos as possible than he is in stealing anything or achieving any lasting goal in the end, which is why it's ultimately pretty easy to ignore how weirdly thought out, or not thought out at all, his plans are. This is the closest to the manic, unpredictable Joker the series gets, though he's also pretty nuts in Pop Goes the Joker, Flop Goes the Joker, where he's a tamer version of Jack Nicholson's homicidal artist and tries to kill Batman with a Batmobile. That one also nearly made my list. Here, the Joker just wants to try all his Zodiac crimes, never mind if he actually succeeds at any of them. As long as he hasn't been caught, he just keeps going. Curiously, it's also not all about killing Batman. He thinks he's accomplished that twice, and he still keeps going, like he's compelled to finish whatever he started. Again, there's a bigger plan at the end about turning the Batcave into a headquarters for Gotham's criminal elite, but that couldn't have been his endgame all along because without Batman, he could never have gotten into the cave. And as it is, neither he or the Penguin were smart enough to find a way to trace their movements while they were locked in Batman's trunk. They didn't even think to look out of the trunk and didn't even know they were locked in there. The Joker seems to make up a lot of this as he goes along, and he's happy as long as he's making problems for people. Menacing isn't the right word, but it gets a little closer here than in other episodes, randomly showing up a couple times in police headquarters without anyone seeing him come in, and at one point he even holds his traitorous ex-hench girl at knife point and forces Batman into a sadistic choice situation. You wouldn't let me hurt a girl, would you? Tripped up by your own ethics. I love Batman's response. He who trips last, trips hardest. I suppose I could stretch and say that maybe the Joker wants to destroy any semblance of order and replace it with his own self-fulfilling prophecy. He's making predictions and making them come true, and at one point, he does steal justice, but I'm going to stick with he's just doing things, and more generally, he's out to wreak havoc on the city. Number 4, The Perfect Crime and Better Luck Next Time. This one probably stuck with me more than any other growing up, because the situation and the cliffhanger seems so serious and dire. I look back at a lot of these, and I'm a little amazed I ever thought I was watching serious drama, even at 6 or 7 years old, but I totally get why I took this one seriously. Some of these earliest episodes are a little less overtly goofy, at least in style and atmosphere. The absurdity is still there, like all the PSAs. There's the one about buckling up for safety, one about the responsibility of taking care of animals, and another of his many declarations against gambling. But the overall tone of the show, as well as the performances, is played totally straight. Don't get me wrong, obviously I love all that extremely cartoony stuff like we got in my number 5 episode. But I think this juxtaposition between looking a little more like the darker detective pulp tradition Batman was born out of and the outlandish gadgets and innuendo is what gave Batman its reputation for being so smart and original. In this episode, Batman is seen almost exclusively at night, except when stock footage forces him to visit police headquarters in the daylight, and there's moody lighting everywhere, a lot of noir-derived spots and whole sections of frame and shadow. Some of the silliest lines are funnier and more surprising because the aesthetic is gritty and mysterious. And Catwoman's theme adds to the unnerving, strange mood in this particular episode because it's basically just the theme from the Twilight Zone. I like all 3 Catwomen, but Julie Newmar is hands down my favorite. And I chose this one because it's her best episode, and because the death trap freaked me out when I was a kid. Newmar did a lot of episodes, and it's telling how good the performances of all 3 were because I think people forget how often she appeared over the other 2. Eartha Kitt played her only twice in the 3rd season, and Lee Merriweather played her in the movie because Newmar was unavailable but never in the series. Though, side note, Merriweather did appear in the series one time as another character, a woman in costume as Cleopatra, going with Bruce Wayne to an ancient Egypt-themed ball. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen. She gets kidnapped by King Tut, who tries to make her his bride, and after Batman foils his plot, Bruce visits her at her apartment, and despite claiming he's married to his work and can't indulge himself in an affair with a beautiful woman, he ultimately can't turn her down when she offers him milk and cookies. That's one of my favorite scenes because it's impossible not to see it as a reference to the movie and an acknowledgement of his tragic infatuation with Miss Kitka, who he discovered was really Catwoman in disguise. There, Bruce finally gets his perfect evening with, essentially, the real Miss Kitka. minus the accent and the over-the-top innuendo. Every actress had her own take on Catwoman, though Newmar and Merryweather's were much closer than Kit's. They easily could have been three completely different women taking up the same mantle, if only Merryweather's version hadn't interrupted Newmar's stint chronologically. They sort of run the spectrum of a different set of cat characteristics. Newmar is playful but calculating, territorial, possessive, and seductive. Merryweather has some of that, but she's more coy and a little more subtle about it. She strikes me as a little less deranged and sadistic than Newmar, but she does seem like she's standing in for Newmar and still playing the same character, just not trying to do a Newmar. Kit is a totally different animal, almost literally. She has as much presence and energy as Newmar, but it's a totally different kind of energy. She's the predatory cat over the house cat or the alley cat. She's the cat that's always ready to strike and has its claws out constantly. I wish she had been in more episodes, because while I think Newmar's version was perfectly... Yep, that was bound to happen. Realized the first time around, and I don't think it ever worked as well after this episode. Kit's take was so original and different, I'm not sure her definitive episode was ever really filmed, though I liked both episodes she was in, and I liked that they were clearly written for her and not for Newmar, unlike what happened when John Ashton played the Riddler. I also appreciate, especially in that third season that seemed to make light of every topical issue it could, simply cast Kit for the role because she was fantastic, and never drew any sort of attention to her ethnicity. Anyway, this is a great episode for a lot of reasons. It's one of the more cohesive villain plots. Every piece of the puzzle comes together, and there's not all those convoluted red herrings and misdirections just to contrive crazy situations or to fill out 2 episodes. Catwoman is trying to steal 2 priceless golden cats, but not because they're worth a fortune, but rather because she's been reading a Gotham history book that tells her that when put together, the cats provide the location of secret pirate treasure. See, kids, if you know your history, you too might grow up and be an infamous master criminal. By the way, Batman has the same set of books, and I love how that's practically all that's on his Bat research shelf. Good thing he's got the Bat computer. Wholly pathetic reference library, Batman. The whole episode is a battle of wits between Batman and Catwoman, each trying to predict what the other will do, and each trying to stay one step ahead, bookended by Bruce and Dick playing 4-dimensional chess, obviously to reflect one of the prevailing themes of the episode and to establish how Batman thinks, and maybe even to poke fun of the already overused chess metaphor. It's actually quite rudimentary, Dick, he says in the teaser. You just have to think 14 moves ahead, that's all. And Dick's response, I think I'll just stick to Latin crossword puzzles. Wow, Batman could give Spock a run for his money. Spock only knows 3-dimensional chess. It's one of the rare times where, as goofy as some of the gadgetry and dialogue is, I actually buy that Batman and Catwoman are intellectually matched. In fact, Catwoman outsmarts Batman on a couple of occasions, and he gets a little lucky at the end, able to finally catch her in the cave where the treasure is hidden only because she got close enough to the statue he irradiated so he could track it. He has the statues now, but since she was close to one, she's picked up enough of the radiation that his tracker can find her. If it weren't for that, she would have won. And that tracker is amazing. It can pick up trace amounts of radiation no matter how far away it is from the Batmobile. And how does Robin know precisely what part of town Catwoman's in just based on one big white arrow on a black background pointing generally in a northwesterly direction? Whereas Catwoman is always ahead of Batman. Batman lets her steal the second statue, which he's irradiated, so he can follow her to her hideout, but Catwoman expected that and had a trap waiting for him when he got there. She's played as a genuinely brilliant villain, smarter and as devious and deadly as any of the male villains. She's sultry and sexy, and this episode has the most risque line of innuendo I noticed in the whole series. So risque, I hesitate to even utter it on this wholesome and family-friendly YouTube channel. But they got away with it in the 60s, so I guess I can say it here. She tells one of her henchmen that he can brush her pussy willows before she goes, and don't go against the fur. Yeah, this show got away with that in 1966. It is almost 50 years later, and I feel kind of dirty for saying it out loud. As I mentioned in the previous video, this show has the same attitude toward women that 60s TV did in general, and it's hard to tell when it's making fun of that attitude and when it's embracing it. But that is totally absent in this episode. Batman certainly doesn't punch Catwoman in the face, but other than that, he really doesn't treat her any differently than his male adversaries. He's not blinded by her beauty, doesn't see her as a delicate flower or misguided, misguided or just a good soul who got mixed up with the wrong people, like so many hench girls. And certainly, she tries to seduce him a lot in later episodes and even sometimes seems to genuinely be falling for him, and vice versa. But I love that here, she wants revenge on him for capturing her in some adventure before the series began, and once she has her claws on him, she's the cat, he's the mouse, and she spends a lot of time playing with her food. She makes him think she's going to crush him with spiky walls that are closing in, which turn out to be rubber-tipped. That's a trap I don't see how Batman would have gotten out of, unless, of course, he noticed that he's not in a 2D side-scroller and he could actually just slip out the front. Then she throws a bomb that pops out a label that says meow. She must have bought that from the Joker. And it's not until she forces Batman to make a choice between two doors that he has to deal with anything truly life-threatening. And I'd bet any amount of money that Catwoman herself isn't actually behind either of those doors. And all that teasing is totally worth it for the audience when Batman picks the wrong door and ends up fighting a tiger. And it's not like when King Tut makes Robin walk the plank over crocodiles. The tiger isn't stock footage. They got a real tiger to tangle with Batman. We didn't mess around in these early episodes. It's pretty obvious when we cut from Batman's stunt double to an Adam West cutaway, but it's still pretty cool to see Batman fight a real tiger, and the way he gets out of it is pretty believable. He's got a communicator in his belt that can adjust the frequency, so he sets it super high to a pitch the tiger can't stand. I do have to question why the pouch on his belt for earplugs is labeled, but nothing else is. The moral of the story in the end is it doesn't matter how smart you are if you allow yourself to be blinded by greed. It can consume you and it'll be your doom. Catwoman refuses to drop her loot when she tries to escape Batman by jumping over a chasm and doesn't quite make it. And despite Batman's attempt to save her, she falls to her apparent doom. In hindsight, if the show had been a little more continuity savvy, it might have been neat to keep her dead and have each subsequent Catwoman just be a different character taking on the mantle. But of course I'm saying that after knowing she'd have to be recast twice and enjoying those different performances. It's a little odd, though, that when Robin asks if she might still be alive and Batman invokes the 9 lives superstition, he doesn't think to use his incredible resources to go down there and see if there's a body. Number 3, High Diddle Riddle and Smack in the Middle. The first episode doesn't boast the most tightly plotted or most cleverly crafted story, but it's this high on my list because it introduces nearly everything that makes the show work right out the gate. And a lot of the strange individual gags are some of the most memorable in the series. A lot of shows have to work hard for several episodes before they fully find their identity. But I think Batman unabashedly lands on its unique brand of absurd humor and creates this fully realized escapist reality right from the beginning. All the principal actors play their parts nearly exactly as they will throughout the series from moment one, with the exception of Burt Ward, who has the same tireless energy and childlike enthusiasm, but yells nearly every line of dialogue. And for some reason, his voice sounds like it's been dubbed in places. There's a boldness to this first outing. The pacing is a little slower than in some later episodes, but it's unapologetically weird and never feels like it's dipping its toe in the deep end. It jumps right in and is confident that its audience will too. The only sign of its being a pilot, needing to explain anything for the viewer to usher us into Batman's world, is a couple of quick references to Bruce's parents' murder, to provide a tragic background for Batman's initial motivation. Bruce seems a bit more brooding and serious here than he will later, but I don't think that's the show not knowing what it is yet. More the series being affected later by its reputation and becoming maybe a little too self-aware of its camp status. The sort of trademark absurdity that's present throughout the show is certainly here, but just as in Catwoman's first appearance, the overall tone is played as more grim and melancholy, and it has no idea how totally, hysterically ridiculous it is any more than Batman does. It seems that the show had a pretty extensive series bible before filming ever began. The attention to detail in the rules and tools of Batman is impressive. We take it for granted as the series wears on and the formula is repeated ad nauseum, but I'm surprised by just how creative Lorenzo Semple Jr. is with this first script. Robin is already saying holy whatever lines, there's a bat climb right away, cool batarang throws, sprays that instantly render people unconscious, PSAs, this time about pedestrian safety, when Robin almost drops a set of window bars on potential unsuspecting pedestrians from a high place, and Batman sticks a hook to a wall just to avoid hurting anyone. And Chief O'Hara barely says 3 lines, and he's already clearly the stupidest person in the show. One of the very first things he says in the series is, "What idiots we are." How delightfully prophetic. This episode has everything it needs to hook an audience. It's so different and such a guilty pleasure for adults, it's easy to see why it caught on so fast. We're looking at grown-ups playing like kids in their backyards, but with awesome production values and a sometimes twisted sense of humor to wink at the adults and create suspense for the kids. Frank Gorshin sets a high bar for guest villains after him, and he completely creates the character he'll play the same way every time. The Batmobile, arguably the show's second star next to Batman, gets a lot to do in this one. Considering TV cars weren't really a thing yet, and this one is sleek and futuristic and is already showing off some of its best gadgets, some of which it uses all by itself, like it has its own personality, I imagine a decent percentage of the success of drawing viewership is how much screen time the car gets in the pilot. We get the Batmobile anti-theft device, and instead of shields like Michael Keaton's Batmobile, Adam West turns any day into the 4th of July, and we get the parachute brakes, the Batscope, and the Batbeam. The Riddler wants to steal the Moldavian mammoth from the Gotham World's Fair, but we don't know what his scheme is until the last moments of the episode. I suspect it's more about pulling off an insanely difficult caper while leaving clues and trying to outwit Batman than it is about actually getting the prize. The Riddler is played as a lunatic who sees it all as a game, and that makes him all the more dangerous. Along the way, he tricks Batman into trying to arrest him for a crime he doesn't really commit, and then slaps Batman with $1 million lawsuit, which, if he loses, will force him to give up crime fighting and reveal his secret identity. That's the weakest idea in the episode, because while it's a good way to create high personal stakes for Batman, it's just looming in the background through most of the episode and seems all but forgotten about until the Riddler seems to have died in a laughing gas explosion. And even if a court didn't believe that Batman was set up to look like he was going after Riddler for a crime he didn't commit, really, why would a judge believe Riddler over Batman anyway? Couldn't Batman just say it's inconsequential because the riddle at the opening crime of the exploding Moldavian cake is proof enough that Riddler should be taken in for suspected attempted murder? But that sort of goofy logic is used all over the show, so I won't hold it against it. Riddler tries to do all kinds of random things to Batman besides the lawsuit, seeming to just try whatever comes to mind on a whim. He's just a crazy person who laughs a lot and likes riddles. How much sense can I really expect him to make, right? Sort of like the Joker and the Zodiac crimes. I'm never sure if Riddler is trying to kill Batman or just screw with him. He has Molly drug Batman's orange juice at a nightclub. That's where we get the Batusi, by the way. And then he kidnaps Robin and tries to steal the Batmobile. And when that doesn't work, he tries to blow it up. I guess Riddler's just trying to make life harder on Batman while he's working on his other secret plan to make a plaster cast of Robin's face so Molly will look like him. It's as convincing as the one Agent 33 uses in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's even more advanced than that, because this one apparently changes the wearer's anatomy. Maybe Riddler was hoping to gain access to the Batcave? He seems interested in Batman's technology, but he never really talks about it. He just vaguely tries to do bad stuff to Batman because he's the good guy. See? Playground logic. When Batman reveals he knew Robin was Molly all along, she pulls a gun on him. But that seems like a last-ditch effort to escape, and not really what she was there for in the first place. But I'm just not sure. If that was the plan all along, why didn't the Riddler just bring all those henchmen he makes Batman fight at the end with guns to the clearing where Batman finds fake but still somehow anatomically correct Robin? Well, it doesn't really matter. All this is just set up for a gag. Molly panics when Batman tells her he sawed off the firing pin when she wasn't looking and stupidly climbs up the atomic pile. Batman climbs a bat rope in a really neat stunt and tries to save her, but she's terrified and falls in before he can do anything about it. Invoking the name of the nightclub from earlier, Adam West delivers a line I think only he is capable of uttering, in a way that makes it simultaneously clear that Batman is playing the scene totally straight, but that West himself gets the joke. What a terrible way to go. It's a really funny and hilariously morbid gag, and I wish the show had done more like it. Very quickly, it got a lot tamer and seemed to decide killing anyone, especially on screen, was going too far. But that's partly what made it, I think, so real to kids. Even in this silly context, I like that violence and being on the wrong side of the law has sometimes disastrous consequences. Looking at this episode isolated from the rest of the series, it really feels like a lot of the joke is that while Batman is totally wholesome and has a strict moral code, he's kind of a total whack job. The idea that Batman is maybe as crazy as his villains is one that's explored in a lot of modern serious Batman stories, but I'm not sure it's not part of the gag here. He has an obsessive personality, dresses like a bat even though he's deputized and could just be a regular cop. He has an atomic battery under his house. He falls in love with a questionable girl in 5 seconds who he has no reason to believe isn't just as nuts as the Riddler, and makes a pun when she gets killed in his much less than safe Batcave, and he lies to Dick Grayson's aunt when he tells her he'd never expose his 16-year-old ward to the criminal element. Of course, within the strange world we're given here, Batman doesn't seem so out of place. And again, as we've touched on earlier, that might partly be because he's perpetuating this culture. But when you start putting all the elements together, he is about as messed up as Michael Keaton's version. I love that all that stuff is subtly acknowledged in something that is trying to be a parody of Batman. A lot of that is inherent in the comic book version, but played as totally normal. Yes, of course Batman has a kid sidekick. Nothing irresponsible there. So here, it's clear that Semple gets how insane Batman looks if you start breaking him down. But the world he embodies remains totally oblivious to it. After all, Aunt Harriet is mortified to imagine Dick in the same room with a criminal like Molly, but doesn't bat an eye at the fact that Batman runs around with a 16-year-old kid wearing a lot less than he is. Number 2, His Honor the Penguin and Dishonor the Penguin. Thanks to everybody last video who pointed out that I was pronouncing those wrong. Don't I feel like a regular Chief O'Hara? When I first watched this episode, I was completely beside myself at the sheer amount of biting satire packed into one story. This show is rarely so focused in its theme. Usually the comedic social commentary comes in short bursts, isolated moments in otherwise routine superhero fare. But this is one hysterical, sharply written political cartoon. The Penguin runs for mayor and Batman is left with no choice but to run against him, as he's the only citizen upstanding and smear-proof enough to beat him. There's so much potential in an idea this crazy to get away from the standard detective parody story and really explore an idea. This episode goes all the way with it. We get to see every stage of the race as Batman insists on running a campaign that's about the issues, while Penguin makes it all about the, as he says, hoopla. So as Penguin holds elaborate parties and stands for nothing, Batman dryly discusses what really matters, and doesn't seem to be drawing much attention to himself. It takes every political cliche to its ultimate absurdity, until the end, when the little-spoken majority finally comes out to vote for Batman. Penguin seems to be winning by a landslide, as Gotham citizens buy into Penguin's flashy showmanship and believe that he's suddenly a humanitarian because of his random acts of staged heroism, while some of them come to hate Batman because he doesn't act like a regular, shallow politician playing for the camera. In one scene, Batman refuses to kiss babies because it's unsanitary, and some of his supporters flip to Penguin's camp because they decide Batman hates children. The episode satirizes political mudslinging, creating dirt on the opposition, buying an election, and favoritism in the media. In the debate, the moderator gives Penguin every chance to speak, but has no interest in giving Batman equal time. Disturbingly, a lot of this stuff doesn't feel nearly as exaggerated as it's meant to be, and there's as much or more truth to the commentary on political corruption and running for office for the wrong reasons now as there was 50 years ago. Batman utters the most poignant and scathing line at his campaign headquarters, when he tells Robin that he believes in the voting system and that the people will make the right choice. He says, if our national leaders were elected on the basis of tricky slogans, brass bands, and pretty girls, our country would be in a terrible mess, wouldn't it? It's another line that Adam West delivers with a lot of subtext. Batman believes it, but there's more than a whiff of sarcasm applied for the real world. Naturally, the episode closes out with a happy ending, and Batman wins as always because he's on the side of justice, whose scales he beats in a thematically appropriate death trap. The lesson is that you have to put your faith in the intelligence and common sense of the people, and not trust public opinion or polls. What counts are the votes. So even though Penguin seemed to be winning by a wide margin, there was a whole section of town no one considered that came out and voted for Batman in droves. Now, considering that most everyone we see in this show is a complete dunderhead, and it's hard to believe anyone in Gotham City can remember where they live or put their shirt on right side out without Batman's help, this ending, even for this show, is a little hard to swallow. I might have expected Batman to make a big speech that people finally paid attention to and showed them the error of their ways, like he did with with the students at Dick's high school in The Joker Goes to School. But the political humor is so cutting, I wonder if writer Stanford Sherman felt the need to end off with a little optimism, as if to say maybe that even in the real world, while the general populace often looks like sheep and can be easily bought and controlled, we're more likely to create that culture if we don't believe in people's intelligence and give them the benefit of the doubt until they've given us reason not to. Batman is the only person in his camp, after all, who has faith in the people to do the right thing. Still, he gets pretty lucky, considering how easily swayed everyone seems and how easy it is all over the series to frame Batman, and everyone, including the Commissioner, will believe Batman and Robin are capable of suddenly acting like criminals. I really like that this story goes all the way with the premise, and Batman actually does run for mayor. There are several episodes that tease a really outrageous or fascinating situation like that, and then cop out in favor of the more procedural direction. In The Devil's Fingers, Bruce and Dick are out of town, and Gordon is almost hysterical, not knowing what to do without Batman when a new criminal pops up. Gordon's answer is machine guns everywhere. The idea of seeing what the police are like without Batman is fun for a minute, but Bruce and Dick come back too quickly, and it turns into a pretty routine episode. Here, when Batman refuses to run for office, I really expected the rest of the episode to be Batman looking for some clever way to stop Penguin's campaign from succeeding that involved looking for clues and beating up henchmen. But Mayor Linseed quickly convinces him to run by asking him to answer the people's call, because he's their only hope. And suddenly we've got a standout, totally original Batman episode that still follows the major elements of the formula, but uses them to the advantage of the satire. Penguin's henchmen are members of the front organization, the Grand Order of Occidental Nighthawks, or Goon, and they put Batman in the death trap. Penguin pretends like he has nothing to do with it, and feigns horror, pretending to try to call the police, but conveniently, he can't find a dime. He creates plausible deniability while obviously behind the whole thing in order to get rid of his competition. Wow, Penguin is like the campy Frank Underwood. In trying to create an exaggerated, stark contrast between Batman and Penguin's methods, Batman is super boring in his speeches and inspires no one because there's no pizzazz in contrast to the Penguin. In one way, that makes perfect sense. Batman's trying to make the point that his trying to win isn't about stroking his own ego, so he should win on ideals rather than theatricality. The trouble is, what is Batman if not a walking, talking commercial for himself? All his stuff is labeled Bat Everything. He's incredibly flashy, all about style and drawing attention to himself. This isn't really a criticism, but I think part of the joke throughout the series is that Batman is totally oblivious to his own eccentricities. I think this is hands down the best of the Penguin episodes, and if any show from this series was going to inspire a later Batman movie, like this did Batman Returns, I'm not surprised it was this one. Penguin in politics has become as much of a recurring thing as Penguin stealing the Batmobile, for some reason, and it makes a lot of sense considering he's often played as a sophisticated criminal whose family had a major influence in the early days of Gotham. Penguin pretending to turn over a new leaf is the premise behind a lot of his episodes, and curiously, Alfred figures in a weird number of them as well. Burgess Meredith obviously loved this role. As much as I love this performance, as I was watching several of these at a time, he shows up so often that some of his episodes really start to run together. This is as much the definitive Penguin episode for me as The Perfect Crime, Better Luck Next Time is the definitive Catwoman episode. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's also a lot of great parroting of specific period figures in politics and media. I wonder what Walter Klondike would do for a Cronkite bar. And number 1, The Joker's Last Laugh and The Joker's Epitaph. I remember always enjoying Cesar Romero's bombastic performance, but he was never my favorite villain in this show, so I'm really surprised by the sheer number of Joker episodes that have made my top 10. I guess those are some of the more memorable and imaginative shows, and this one tops my list not because of clever commentary or cutting satire or going against the formula, but because I can't stop smiling whenever I watch it. It's another pretty tightly written plot, and I appreciate that all the story elements come together by the end, and there are some great payoffs to things from part 1 that I didn't expect to see in part 2. The main reason I love it is because it's the episode that watches to me more like an actual comic book adventure. It's also one of the best paced episodes in terms of comedy. The gags and clever turns of phrase come at a rapid pace. Joker comes up with a counterfeit money scheme, which he unleashes by replacing a bank teller with a robot. I don't know where he got these things any more than I know where the Joker in the animated series got Captain Clown. And yes, Batman kills Joker's robots here too. Batman keeps dropping wisdom about robots, like he's speaking from his myriad experience going up against them, despite the fact that he never deals with them anywhere else in the series, but apparently they're really commonplace. When he first deals with the robot at the bank, he reveals that he was able to sniff it out because he says even the most infallible robots have one defect. They have no sense of humor. And at the end he says, that's the problem with robots, Robin. They lack even the most minimal sense of loyalty. Those ideas figure cleverly into the story, as Batman's emotions get the better of him when he springs a trap on the Joker as Bruce Wayne. He tries to set Joker up to catch him printing fake money red-handed, which he does by claiming he illegally bet on the speculative market and needs Joker to print $1 million in fake bills for him. Bruce bribes Joker with a pre-signed document that will make him vice chairman of the Gotham National Bank. Joker manages to kidnap Robin when he bursts through a window to take Joker in as he's printing the counterfeit bills, and he makes Bruce pull the lever that will turn Robin into a comic book. Alfred, in a bat suit, comes to the rescue, and Joker escapes in a cloud of bat gas. But in all the drama, Bruce fails to grab the document before Joker can make off with it. And the whole second part is built around Joker now having control of the bank because of Bruce's failure. Of course, Bruce could have just told Joker part of his agreement is that he sees Joker's work before he signs the paper, but you live and you learn. Batman isn't totally infallible in this series in general, of course, because he gets himself kidnapped and escapes certain death just in the nick of time in nearly every episode. But it's fun that in an episode where Batman suggests people are better than robots because of their emotional attachments, it's his own emotions and general human imperfection that makes a second part to this even necessary. Batman and Robin ultimately succeed in defeating the Joker because they stay cool under pressure and use their heads. Batman taking his own advice from the very beginning when he says, no time for emotion, let's apply our brain power. But also because they do have that human loyalty for each other that robots and the Joker don't have. I like the irony of Batman using Joker's robots against him at the end in proving his point of humanity over automation. He uses a robotic level of reason unfettered by uncontrolled feelings, but it's because of his and Robin's human loyalty for each other that they ultimately win. Bruce's sanity is called into question by Commissioner Gordon when he names the Joker vice president of the bank, and of course he can't tell Gordon that the whole thing was a trap for the Joker without revealing his identity. I mean, he has worked publicly with Bruce Wayne before, and it's well known that they're friends, and people seem to buy Alfred in the Batsuit as Batman, despite the totally different build, wrinkles, and mustache. So Bruce could just say that he and Batman planned the whole thing together, but then we wouldn't get a parody of Sigmund Freud, the closest thing we get to a 60s Batman Hugo Strange, or Alfred bat climbing up a building. And I'd be lying if I didn't say a lot of the points I'm giving this episode are for giving us that priceless image. And we wouldn't get a van that says Anti-Lunatic Squad. I like that Bruce is put in a straitjacket in a Joker episode. Joker is the poster child for insanity, but it's Bruce Wayne that's deemed insane for working with him. And in an episode that's about striking a balance between emotion and reason. Or at least that idea is mentioned a couple times. I'm not going to pretend like there's a real exploration of those ideas throughout, but some of what I think it's maybe getting at with the ending is inherent in grouping these elements together. I also like this one a lot because, as it feels and is plotted more like a comic book, the Joker actually operates out of a comic book print shop. It's a really well-designed, wonderfully detailed set. I especially like the hallway where you have to walk through cutouts of playing card shapes. And the death trap is nearly meta. Robin is adapted from a 2D comic book to a 3D television series, and then is nearly printed back into a comic book. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of positive remarks to make about the comic book in this episode. The panel layouts are an uninspired grid of boring boxes, the story is incomprehensible, the dialogue is totally random, sometimes just people saying action words like they're quoting words that pop up when Batman's fighting people, and it looks like it was drawn by a 6-year-old and colored by his 2-year-old brother. The tragedy of the fate Robin almost endures is not that he's nearly printed into a comic book, but that he's nearly printed into this comic book. And finally, good citizens, we have reached the end of our bizarre and colorful adventure together. I know Adam West isn't everyone's Batman, but he's definitely one of mine. The show watches so differently now for me, not just because I'm older, but because we've had so much more Batman as the years have worn on. A lot of Batman fans still don't like this version because they see it as a mockery of the real Batman. It tarnishes the serious spirit of a dark, psychologically complex, sometimes tragic hero. But what I love about it now is that I can enjoy it without the fear of it continuing to negatively affect that version of the character in any medium. It was hard to say if the popularity of Batman would survive the 60s show and ever get back to its roots. And thanks largely to Frank Miller and the comics, and then Batman in 1989, the animated series in 92, and then Nolan's re-envisioning of Batman for screen again in 2005, it did. And it's one of the most popular characters in fictional institutions there is. It's great that we finally have the series on video, and all this fantastic new merchandise, and the really quality comic book series DC is still publishing, because it can coexist without threatening serious Batman. In the 1960s, though intended as a parody, this was Batman. I think partially because it was a parody of a thing a lot of people who loved it were unfamiliar with. And there's the rub. It turned Batman into a big joke, but it popularized a lot of these characters for the first time. Arguably, all the incredibly popular dark Batman stuff might not have come into being, or at the very least wouldn't be as popular, if it weren't for the enormous but brief success of this show. It certainly took a long time to get Batman past that campy reputation, but now that we've seen that happen, we've seen successful versions of the character at every point in between ultra dark and ultra silly, I think it works in a certain way even better than it did in the 60s. If you like it, but you also love serious Batman, it's a nice, light, escapist break from the heavy stuff. And that's something I certainly can use from time to time in a world where a lot of popular entertainment is all about gritty, violent, sometimes soul-crushing realism. And it's maybe even a better parody because Dark Batman is thought of more as real Batman now. Watch The Dark Knight, and then watch The Joker's Last Laugh and The Joker's Epitaph. Watch Batman Returns, and then watch His Honor the Penguin and Dishonor the Penguin. There was a time when I can completely understand the irritation at the image the show gave Batman that he had such a hard time getting past. It was never more frustrating for me than in 1997. But now Batman vs. Superman is being made, a movie partially based on the thing that started to return Batman back to his roots in the minds of the public. And there's also an animated 60s Batman in the works, voiced by Adam West and Burt Ward. More than ever before, I get to have my cake and eat it too.